Urban planning as a field primarily focuses on the planning of cities for people. Planning is an anthropocentric field. In other words, planning at its heart is an entirely human-centered practice focusing on the physical and social arrangement of people. One ethical dilemma that I perceive in planning is that its anthropocentric nature is constantly at odds with the natural environment. Should we prioritize the current needs for people in cities, or do we prioritize the sustainability of these cities, the people, and the environment so that they can continue to support future generations and prevent future disasters? In APA's Planning Ethics Guide, it states that as planners we should strive to protect the integrity of the natural environment and pay special attention to the long-range consequences of present actions. But in practice, often the focus is on solutions such as building design elements like LEED certification, urban design concepts such as new urbanism, or providing better support for active transportation. Yet, these solutions are rather limited, and I don't think they are enough for considering the needs of future generations and the protection of our natural systems. I think that we are obligated to do more, and we must find more inclusive systematic process for planning for the needs of future generations, and that if we are going to successfully navigate this, we must expand our view of what public we serve, not just for today's stakeholders, but also the ecosystems which support us and our future public. The first issue to overcome is the image that urban issues are distinct and different from other issues. Urbanization has many effects on the earth. It changes land systems, hydrological systems, air quality. It fragments habitats and ecosystems. And cities are also affected by nature as they are vulnerable to natural hazards. Human capital is not so distinct from natural capital, and we would not exist without nature and its support of resources. So how can we acknowledge the connectedness of people and nature to create different outcomes? If we consider the Urban Sustainability Framework written by Gradel in 1999, he proposes that a city is a sum of its parts. It's a living, changing being, a single organism, part of a greater system. And if we look at this temporally, to examine the changes of a whole system over time, we might be able to apply this framework in justifying a larger stake for the environment in our planning process. For example, let's look to the Yellowstone National Park, where for years the government had been working to remove predators, worried about people's safety in the parks. They tried to solve a problem for people by only looking at a portion of the system, the wolves, and eradicated nearly all of them. The ecosystem without wolves was unbalanced. The elk no longer had a natural predator and became overpopulated, overgrazing and eroded the land surrounding the river, and this caused a trophic cascade. All the species in the system had become unbalanced. However, in the 90s, they began to repopulate predators into the park, especially the wolves, after they had saw how the entire system had been affected. Finally, the ecosystem was able to restore balance, with populations of all the species in check once more, and the soil surrounding the rivers was able to be restored. This allowed the river to flow normally again. Taking this ecological example, we can conclude that by looking simply at cities and people, it's like trying to solve a problem with only one part of the picture. It doesn't work. It causes more problems than solutions. If instead we can look at cities as one part of the entire system, we can begin to see how each part has value in keeping things balanced and has a potential to even reverse problems. However, even with broadening the scope of planning to include these natural systems and moving away from simply planning for people, there's still the issue of how do we balance this people today or the preservation for future in a more ethical way. Let's look at another example in New Zealand, where the indigenous Whanganui tribe successfully advocated for the recognition of the Whanganui River as an integral part of their lives. The river is an essential resource for their way of life and is central to many cultural practices. They advocated for the right to have a seat at the table in protecting its future for their people. They passed a bill recognizing the river as a living entity given the same legal rights as a person. This is done through representation of the interest of the river by two of their members in all of the decision-making that might affect the health of the river. This form of protection, through humanizing legal rights for nature, allows the voice of nature to be included in decisions made. Now, when opportunities for increasing tourism activities around the river rise, they can accurately manage the positive and negative outcomes by having the participation of this group as another stakeholder in these decisions. They work alongside businesses that already have a voice, and now they're given equal footing. If the increase in tourism might negatively affect ecosystems but increase economic development, all the stakeholders can balance this in these conversations and decide how to proceed. I think that by advocating for recognition of these voices in planning, we can begin to recognize the interests of the environment as another stakeholder that might be given a better chance of having future generations and environments in ethical practice. I believe that this ethical dilemma should be carefully considered, especially as I enter as a new planner into a political climate where the words climate change are taboo and phrases like science-based, evidence-based, and vulnerable are banned. And we see national parks are being threatened. Ultimately, I know I must find convincing and strategic ways advocating for this, a stronger voice for these things in the planning field, so that we can sustain regardless of the political environment to see lasting change on the planning process for sustainability.